So my talk this morning is on the septic tank inspection system. So I use the word septic tank. We're talking about septic tanks or treatment, other types of treatment systems at single houses. But I just use septic tanks just for convenience. We publish a report every year on the inspections that the local authorities do. They do over 1,000 inspections each year, and we publish a report. So that's out in about 2 weeks. So I'll give you a preview of what's coming in that. Just go back and give some context as well on the system, because the inspection regime that came in, it's there now 10 years, just over 10 years. So it's a timely time to have a look at it. So going back, this came in originally, there was a European Court of Justice case against Ireland in relation to insufficient regulation of septic tanks. It was unusual at the time. Actually, it was under waste law, actually, even though it's the corrective measures are under water legislation. So on foot of that, the Water Services Act was amended in 2012, and that brought in the requirement for registration initially. And a lot of people remember that as controversial enough at the time. People had to register their septic tanks, everybody across the country. And there was registration regulations to go with that. The domestic wastewater treatment system regulations came in, and they set out requirements that we all have to comply with if we have a septic tank. So this is for everybody up till then, I guess. When you went for planning and you got your septic tank, you got permission originally, there was requirements there around standards and the code of practice and all that. But this is something that applies to anyone that has a septic tank. So there's requirements there in legislation. And then there was regulations brought in for the grant systems as well. There are responsibilities under the legislation. So the owner of a septic tank, they had to register the tank back in 2013. We are required to ensure the systems are not a risk to human health and the environment. So that's an overarching requirement in the Act. And then the regulations, there's specific requirements there, and they can't obstruct inspections. They have to allow inspections to proceed and so on. The Water Services Authority, i.e. the council, they're called the Water Services Authority under this legislation. They take and maintain the registrations. That's done centrally through Protect Our Water. So that was set up back in the day, and we all had to register through a website. By post as well and so on at the time. It's local authorities, inspectors, they do the inspections and they do the enforcement and so on. The EPA, we appoint the inspectors. It's quite unusual, even though they're local authority staff, they need an appointment from the EPA. So there's a training course inspectors do, and then on foot of that and certain qualifications, they get an appointment card from the EPA. We also issue a plan which coordinates the inspections, and we supervise the area generally. Legal requirements, just so people know, the inspection is done against a set of legal requirements. It's not just an opinion of an inspector. It's not a code or guidelines or different standards in different areas. There's a set of requirements in the legislation. So like I said earlier, you have to ensure your system isn't a risk to human health and the environment. It can't leak or discharge other than intended. Roof water and surface water isn't allowed into a tank. Parts and components must be fit for purpose. The tank must be dislodged at intervals by an authorised contractor, and you have to keep a receipt of that for 5 years. So that's what they come in, and that's what they'll go through the property and the tank and check those items. The National Inspection Plan, we're on the 4th iteration of that now. So this is what the core of this is to set out where the inspections are done and how many each authority has to do. And that's guided by the information we have on septic tanks, their pressure, on the latest information, 148 at-risk water bodies. So we've mapped those, we know where they are, and we've prioritised inspections close to those water bodies. And the other risk is to groundwaters and wells. Septic tanks and domestic wells are often co-located. There's 160,000, I think, that are co-located. So most domestic wells, people also have a septic tank, and that risk of polluting local groundwater sources, that's the other risk. So we've mapped areas where there's shallow soils and people are using household wells, and again prioritised inspections into those areas. And then some inspections are done across the country, so there's potential for inspection anywhere. There's 1,200 inspections per annum is the minimum requirement. And this is separate, as well, to other work that local authorities do and that LawPro do. So LawPro are doing work as part of their broader brief that takes in septic tanks. Local authorities will do work around complaints and so on. That's separate. The support systems that are there, first of all, I mentioned there's a training course, so the local authority training group run a training course. It's a 2-day training course that the inspectors complete, which is a very good course. They have to do that, it's prescribed in legislation. So that's what initially, and there's a training manual and so on. And then they get appointed, as we said. On the top right there, there's an IT system which the EPA hosts, and the inspections are done through that. So at the start of the year, the local authority can go into this system. They can zone in on their county and zone in on local areas. They'll see the zones I just spoke about. The red areas there are where there's risk to wells. The green areas are close to rivers where there's a risk to rivers, and septic tanks are considered a pressure. It just happens in this case there's both in this area. And the blue is where there's overlap. So mostly you'll see red on its own, or you'll see a river with a strip of green. And the geodirectory is overlaid into that, so they can then pick houses within that, and then they'll go and inspect those. And they have an allocation each, which is done pro rata based on how many properties are in a local authority in those risk zones relative to the overall nationally. So that's how they line up the inspections. And the inspections are actually done through the IT system then as well. The other main support is there's a network there through Nice, and we run a conference, and occasionally we put subgroups together to develop guidance on certain areas and so on. So the results of the inspections from 2022, there was 1,143 inspections. That 1,200 requirement kicks in this year, so last year it was 1,000, so 1,143. 49% failed, and that figure has been pretty much consistent since the start. It fluctuates around 50% of tanks fail inspection in some way. 20% of those are tagged as risk to the environment, to human health, so the local authority tagged those ones as part of it, so they'd have more serious issues. There's a breakout there in the chart. This is all published, so you can see previous reports online, and you'll see the next one in a couple of weeks. And you can see if you look from the bottom there, about 30% of systems not maintained, 20-something not desludged, and then the more kind of structural issues, so where septic tanks are discharging to ditches and streams and leaking and so on, they're at around 10%. So they're the issues that are being detected. In terms of enforcement, so if you fail, you get issued an advisory notice, and you have to comply with the notice, fix the system and comply with the notice. So there's been about 5,000 issued over the entirety of the system up to the end of 2022 from 2013, and 78% of those are closed. So the issues have been dealt with on around 4,000 septic tanks. But within that, what is concerning is there's 550 advisory notices that are open greater than 2 years. So those are ones that are open long term and are not being closed off. So they're of concern. And half of those, for example, involve sewage ponding and guarding, or going into ditches and streams where they shouldn't be. So they're serious issues. They're not just minor issues. There's exposure to effluent, and effluent's running off and could be polluting water courses, wells, and so on. And inconsistent enforcement is a concern around this. So, for example, if you take legal actions, there's been 47 legal actions since the scheme commenced, but 90% of those are by 3 authorities. So, follow through and enforcement is our main issue with this. The inspections run well, they're going well, the system works well, and there are a lot of systems being corrected and issues being dealt with, but the follow-through on some of them isn't sufficient. There is a grant scheme available to assist where you fail inspection for structural issues, not for maintenance or desludging, and that's 85% of costs up to 5,000. That's funded by the department and administered by local authorities. So just a couple of other observations. In terms of engagement, there's a lot of information on our website and a lot of information on local authority websites. So there's a lot of information there for householders and so on how to maintain systems and what to do if your system is a problem and it's faulty. I put up those 2 leaflets because I just think they're very good, and they're available on our website. One is how to check your septic tank, just simple things you can do to check it's working all right. And the other one is about your well, and I always try and link this to any presentations on septic tanks. A very important message is for people to get their well tested and to check that their well is okay. And there's a separate grant scheme for remediation of domestic wells, so for replacement or treatment and so on. So there's the septic tanks and the grant schemes around that, but there's a separate one for household wells as well. And just finally, a point of interest, the World Health Organization has shown a strong interest in the inspection system, and used a lot of the information we have from it in their reports and so on. And they developed a international training module last year, a 4-part module, and the plan is used a presentation on it at 10 minutes of the 4th module, which is the only example used internationally. So they've showed a strong interest in it. Some of the things they've pointed out that they see as positive, it's risk-based, it's small but nationally representative sample, there's links to follow-up improvement and supports and information and incentives through the grants and so on. And they're strongly using it now on training courses they're doing internationally. So look, it's for people particularly that were involved, I guess, day one in setting it up. The system itself has fared well, and it's nice to see it being used abroad, where there's obviously much more significant issues internationally in some countries. So it can be used as a model there for inspection. In conclusion, I'd say, like I said, it's 10 years old now, the septic tank inspection system. When it came in, it was controversial. It's bedded in well. It's no longer, I guess, controversial maybe, but there's over 10,000 inspections done, 4,000 systems fixed, and I think local authorities find the system, generally it's very positive in terms of their use, or their use of the system that's there, and the frameworks and the supports and so on. I think on enforcement, like we said, there's more work there, and particularly to have consistency across the country, and that there's follow through on the advisory notices, and that they're followed through on and closed off essentially. And that's my conclusion on the talk. Thank you.